Hey friends, welcome to Wednesday night, live with the best of friends. We are live tonight on July 16th and just finished praying with our Brook Church family. So we are spending our summer Wednesday nights in prayer together. And this night was just a list of all of our people who are connected to Brookridge in any way, our regular attenders, our members, our kids, our online viewers. And we just spent some time praying together for our people and our family. It's a good thing. So if you're watching, we probably prayed for you. So yeah, this is the No Frills Summer Wednesday Night Live. No lists, no shenanigans, just talking about prayer. We're going to continue to do that. Probably in a couple of weeks, we'll jump into the actual words of the Lord's Prayer and start to go through those. But we did pray like Jacob. We did pray like Daniel. We talked the last couple of weeks about, again, why should we pray or teach us to pray more, why the Lord's Prayer is so important. And then tonight I thought we would focus on praying like Jesus, some of the things that Jesus said outside of the Lord's Prayer, where he taught us how to pray on the importance of prayer. So that's what we're hitting tonight. And we'll jump right. It's like, hey, why are we talking about prayer? There's a ton of reasons, but right to the heart of it, if you want to get there, most of us don't have a healthy prayer life. A guy named D.A. Carson said, if you really want to embarrass the average Christian, just ask them to tell you about their private prayer lives. We serve and we even share our faith, but our private prayer times can be embarrassing to talk about, right? And what's concerning is that Jesus told us that apart from him, we can do nothing. And the main way we access the power and the presence of Jesus is through prayer. Jesus said in John 5:19 about himself, he said, I do nothing. I only do what I see my Father doing. And that meant that Jesus depended on the power of the Father in him and through him. And that was a power that he accessed through prayer. Luke, who wrote the Gospel of Luke, goes out of his way to show us that Jesus' whole life was saturated by prayer. Jesus prayed at his baptism in Luke 3. In chapter 4, he prayed through his temptation. In chapter 5, Luke tells us that Jesus often went off alone by himself to pray. In chapter 6, Luke tells us before Jesus chose his disciples, he spent the night before praying. We talked about that a couple of weeks ago. It's like, how many big decisions do we make without involving God at all? We just do it. And even Jesus, before he chose the guys that were going to be closest to him in this world, he spent all night praying before that. In Luke 9, before he presented his disciples with that do or die question, who do you say that I am? He spent the afternoon in prayer. After they made their declaration, and Peter famously said, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God, you're the Messiah, you are the one sent from God. That put their lives at risk, all those who took that stance back in the day. And Luke tells us that he took them up on a mountain to spend time in prayer. In chapter 11 is where the disciples asked Jesus in Luke to teach them how to pray. After all they had seen, right? Miracles, sermons, that's what they wanted to learn more about. Not teach us to preach, not teach us to do miracles, but Jesus, teach us to pray. They recognized it was the key to everything. In Luke 22, Jesus promises Peter he'll pray for him during his hour of trial. And then Jesus commands his disciples to pray so they won't fall into temptation. Talked about that a couple of weeks ago. And then in Luke 23, Luke shows us that Jesus' last breath was a prayer. And the point he seems to be making is, if Jesus, who was God in human form, felt like he couldn't do anything on his own, and so he was always driven to pray, why do we go throughout our lives with so little prayer? Do we think ourselves more capable than Jesus? The question could be asked. So then in Luke's second book, which was the book of Acts, he demonstrates that the prayer was the foundation of the early church's ministry and the secret behind everything that they accomplished and the growth. In Acts 1, they joined together constantly in prayer. In Acts 2, they devoted themselves to prayer. In Acts 4, they prayed for an outpouring of signs and wonders in the midst of persecution. Acts 6 says the apostles devoted themselves to prayer and the ministry of the word. Both were considered ministries of the church. It wasn't that preaching was the real ministry and then prayer was just the preparation for it. Prayer was the ministry. In Acts 9, Peter prayed for the sick. Prayed for the sick. In Acts 12, the church prayed for Peter to be released. In Acts 13, they were praying when God raised up missionaries. In Acts 14, they appointed elders through prayer. In Acts 16, Paul and Silas prayed when they were forgotten about in prison. Luke concludes the book by describing Paul's ministry. Apostle Paul, one of the greatest Christ followers to ever live, his ministry, preaching, healing, and praying. And you can literally find the early church in prayer in every single book, every single chapter in the book of Acts. It was fundamental to what they did. The concern is what was fundamental for the early church has become supplemental in the church today. We look at prayer as something we do on the way to ministry. And they looked at it as the ministry. And it shows. In Acts chapter 2, they prayed for 10 days and 3,000 people were saved. The conclusion from the book of Acts, it's more important to talk to God about people than to people about God. And this does not mean that sharing our faith isn't important, but it means that everything we do should have an underpinning of prayer, should have a foundation of prayer, should have prayer interwoven all through it. Which begs the question, why do we find it so difficult to pray? If we really want to follow Jesus, if we love Jesus, which I believe those in our Brookridge family and extended family, we really do. Most of us, when trying to answer the question, why do we not pray, or why do we find it so difficult to pray, we point to a problem with our self-discipline. Like, we don't pray enough for the same reason that we don't work out enough or we don't eat enough healthy things. Like, it's a lack of self-discipline. And so maybe you're thinking that maybe this is just an attempt to get you to make prayer a resolution like we do at New Year's and all throughout the year. But here's maybe a different reason why we don't pray. It's painfully honest, but it's the truth. For many people, we're just not sure how much good prayer actually does. Nobody wants to admit this in church, but sometimes you pray and things happen, and sometimes you pray and they don't. And sometimes you don't pray, and the thing you forgot to pray for happens anyway. I think that's why a lot of people struggle with praying. So the encouragement is that in Luke 11, when the disciples asked Jesus to teach them to pray, it says, now Jesus was praying in a certain place, and when he finished, one of his disciples said to him, Lord, teach us to pray. After giving them some initial instructions about how to approach God, which we call the Lord's Prayer, he tells a story that deals with our primary obstacle to prayer, which is unanswered prayer. Like I said, maybe this is the reason you quit praying. Maybe this is the reason you, at a time in your life, or maybe right now, are thinking about giving up on church and God altogether. You prayed a prayer that you thought surely any loving God would answer, and things didn't happen like you thought they should, and you can't make sense of it. And clearly, Jesus was aware of that frustration, and he recognized it as our primary obstacle to praying effectively. The good news is that means there's nothing wrong with you. You just take a minute and let that settle in. Your doubt doesn't make you a strange, evil, unbelieving person or not cut out to follow Jesus. It's a natural question. And Jesus recognized that this will be our biggest hang up with prayer. So the first thing he does is tell us a story to address it. So here it is. Luke chapter 11. Just like I said. Verse 5. It says, and he said to them, which of you has a friend? Which of you who has a friend will go to him at midnight and say to him, friend, lend me 3 loaves. For a friend of mine has arrived on a journey, and I have nothing to set before him. So unfortunately, in first century Palestine, there were no 24-hour grocery stores to go to, no late night Taco Bells. And in the first century, hospitality was huge. So this guy doesn't want to send his midnight guest away hungry. Verse 7, and he will answer from within, do not bother me. The door is now shut, and my children are with me in bed. I cannot get up and give you anything. He said, which of you has a friend that will say that? A few other details to help us make sense of the story. First, in a country without electricity, midnight was actually the middle of the night. Not like here, where midnight for a lot of people is bedtime. These people went to bed at sundown. So by midnight, this guy's been asleep for like 4 hours. This guy is well into REM sleep. And then notice it says he's in bed with his children. In those days, people lived in one-room houses with one big bed area, and everybody slept in the same part of the house. So to get up and get bread, he's going to wake everybody else up. parents, maybe you can remember how irritating it would be to have finally gotten all 5 of your kids down to sleep in a 1-bedroom apartment. And then all of a sudden, some dude starts banging on the door. Hey, I need some bread. Remember when your kids were young, you got them down, you're like, hey, nobody breathe. I love how Jesus starts the conversation, though. He says, friend, lend me 3 loaves. It's a good word for him to use because when you wake up somebody at midnight, the whole friendship is right on thin ice. Third detail to notice, the man making the request doesn't have an emergency. He's not like, hey, my wife fell down and she can't get up. He's like, hey, I had some guests drop by and I don't have enough Pop-Tarts to feed them. And finally, the request he puts forward is exorbitant. In those days, the loaves of bread were huge. 1 loaf would have been sufficient. This guy asked for 3. But what do we see in verse 8? I tell you, though he will not get up and give him anything because he is his friend. In fact, after this, probably not his friend anymore. Yet because of his impudence, or some translations say because of his boldness or because of his shamelessness, he will rise and give him whatever he needs. His request is not granted because the other guy loves him as a friend. His request is granted because of his boldness and his persistence in asking. And then Jesus says, and I tell you, ask, it will be given to you. Seek, you will find. Knock, and it will be opened to you. So this whole analogy of knocking reinforces this idea of persistent asking. When you knock, you don't just walk up to a door, hit it once, and be like, oh well. If you hear one single solitary bump in the middle of the night, you assume that one of your kids has fallen off the bunk bed or your cat knocked something over, not that somebody's knocking. And Jesus says, knock, and if no one comes to the door, keep knocking. Let them know the lights being off don't fool you. You know they're home, and you know they know you know they're home, and you're not going away because you're just one of those kind of people. You might as well just get up and answer. So the point is clear. God only gives some things, and we said this earlier on one of our Wednesday nights, in response to ongoing, patient, persistent prayer. Or we could say it this way: God delights to share his power with those who are bold enough to bother him. And now let's look at Luke 18, because I want to show you how Luke records the same essential teaching twice, since this is such a common problem, and the answer he's giving us is very counterintuitive. It's hard to get our minds around it. So this is it. Luke chapter 18 now. All right, that's it. And he told them a parable, this is Jesus, to the effect that they ought always to pray and not lose heart. He said in a certain city there was a judge who neither feared God nor respected man. There was a widow in that city who kept coming to him and saying, give me justice against my adversary. And for a while he refused. But afterwards he said to himself, though I neither fear God nor respect man, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will give her justice so that she will not beat me down by her continual coming. And Jesus says, unbelievably, this is like praying to God. Wait. When you listen to a parable, one that Jesus told, you're usually thinking, okay, somebody in this parable is me and somebody in this parable is God. That's how parables work. This one's a little confusing because the disciples are like, which one is us? Like, we have to be the needy old widow, that would make God, what? The angry judge? Like, you're saying God's like a grumpy old judge who doesn't really care and only gives this woman what she wants because she won't stop annoying him? Like, I wouldn't want to be the one making that comparison. Only Jesus could get away with that analogy. But the point is really straightforward. If you want something from God, just keep banging on the door. Eventually he'll respond to you, not because he loves you, but because you just bother him to death. Is there any other way to read this? Yes, there is. Jesus' point is not to compare God to an unjust judge, but to contrast him with one. He's saying if even an unrighteous, selfish judge would grant answers because of persistent prayer and asking, and even if a sleeping, stingy friend will eventually get up and give you some bread, how much more will our Heavenly Father, who does love us and does care for us and constantly watches over us, how much more will he give us what we need when we come to him persistently and ask him? Through these parables, these stories, Jesus teaches us, I think, 4 important things about how we should pray. We're going to start talking in a couple of weeks about what we should pray word-wise, but we want to focus on how to pray adverb-wise, like our attitudes of prayer. So, number 1, how should we pray? based on these two stories from Jesus. Number one is desperately. Both of the characters in the story are desperate. Both are entirely out of options. The hungry man has nowhere else to go for bread. The wronged woman has nowhere else to turn for justice. One of the things that keeps us from praying is our failure to recognize how utterly desperate we are for God's help. As Americans, we're the can-do people, right? We're a bunch of people who assume that with enough time and energy, we can figure out the solution to anything, right? It's right there in our name, American. We're not the Americans. We have books for dummies on every possible subject, because the idea is if we can just figure out the technique, we can become capable at whatever we need to be. We're a DIY people, and that's good, but it's deadly when you're dealing with a God who says, apart from me, you can do nothing. Paul Miller wrote a book called The Praying Life, and he said, if you are not praying, and maybe that's you, if you're struggling to maintain a robust prayer life, he said, here's your diagnosis. If you're not praying, then you are quietly confident that time, money, and talent are all you need in life. He says you'll always be a little too tired or a little too busy to pray. But if, like Jesus, you realize you can't do life on your own, then no matter how busy, no matter how tired you are, you will find the time. That's big. And that is hard to wrap our heads around, but real life. Parents, you could read just about every possible book on Christian parenting, thinking, if I can just figure out this parenting thing, I'll be able to guarantee that my kids turn out right. But Elise Fitzpatrick, on her book, Give Them Grace, she wrote, this is what Christian books on parenting are trying to do. Give you a formula and tell you that if you follow it, it'll guarantee success in parenting. But she points out that God was a perfect father, and 1/3 of the angels and the 2 humans he created rebelled. So she's like, you think you're going to be able to out-technique God? She says the really dangerous problem with thinking there's a foolproof way of parenting is that it keeps us from the one thing we most need, and that is to cast ourselves down at the feet of Jesus, looking to him for his mercy in our kids' lives to do what we can't do. There was a quote that I read that said, I did my best parenting by prayer. I began to speak less to the kids and more to God. Prayer is not just preparation for the ministry of parenting. Prayer is the most important element of parenting. And this author, Elise Fitzpatrick, pointed to the passage in 1 Peter 5, where Peter says, humble yourselves in prayer under the mighty hand of God, so at the proper time he may exalt you, casting all your anxieties on him, for he cares for you. Who does the exalting? God does. Hope in him. Your hope for your kids is not in your parenting skills, even the skills you learn from the Bible, but in the grace of God, who will himself raise them up. My hope for this church is not in my pastoring skills. My hope is in the grace of God working in your lives and in mine. My hope for my marriage is not good Christian techniques in relationships, as important as those are. At the end of the day, my hope is in God's grace. Our hope for success in mission is not lying in a superior strategy or our talent, but entirely in God's grace. No skill, not even biblical skill, is sufficient. The prophet Jeremiah said, cursed is the man who trusts in man. And one of the ironic ways we trust in man is when we learn all the biblical principles and think that those by themselves guarantee spiritual life. Jesus didn't save us by teaching us principles. He saved us by giving us his resurrection power. It's a tragedy to master the principles and then forget the dependency on the relationship that gives those words life. So remember, our hope is in the mercy of God, who will himself lift us up and establish us. Our only hope is in the mercy of God. And if we understand that, if we grab a hold of that, we will pray desperately. The core of effective prayer is desperation, not discipline. And that is week 1. We're going to talk a little bit more about this. I know you're all clamoring to get the next 3 things from these 2 passages, but you're just going to have to wait till 7 o'clock next Wednesday night. I will be here. Hopefully you will be too. I appreciate you. Grateful what God is doing in our Brookridge community and our extended communities, our network churches and pastors. We appreciate them. We appreciate all of you who come either log on at 7 on Wednesday nights or watch this at a later time. appreciate you. Go to YouTube because Facebook's deleting our videos every couple of weeks now. They don't want to store anything for us. So our YouTube page has our Sunday services and our Wednesday night lives all saved there. All right. Hope you all have a great week. We'll catch up to you on Sunday. See you later.